Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe. If you dare.
Turns out, mine and my boyfriend's uncles live on the same street, in the same building, one above the other, in identical apartments basically. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. What's the most insane coincidence you've ever experienced?
Number 1.
Commenter. I moved to India when I was 10 years old with my family. When we moved into our apartment in Mumbai, my parents told me that my room used to belong to a girl my age named Sarah. Fast forward 1 year, I go to Bangkok for a swim meet and meet a girl named Sarah who used to live in Mumbai. Details are exchanged. Turns out it is the Sarah who used to have the bedroom that I was still occupying in Mumbai. Fast forward 6 years, parents are currently living in Turkey and I begin college at a small school in Illinois, like 1,000 students. Everyone keeps telling me about this other girl who grew up abroad that I should meet. We eventually met at a party. It is the same Sarah. Apparently I follow her around the world. Person B. There must be something about Bangkok. I worked in DC for a long time, and there was a guy across the hall I was friends with. I eventually quit the job, and spent some time traveling Thailand. I got on the Bangkok SkyTrain one day, and who was sitting right in front of me? The dude from across the hall back in DC. What always amazes me is how many variables make one coincidence possible. What if I decided not to go where I was going? What if I arrived 5 minutes late? What if I got on the train car immediately to the right or left? What if he was sitting at the other end of the car and I didn't notice him? Kinda makes you wonder how often you just miss people you know by 5 minutes.
Number 2.
I was halfway through a book called Synchronicity, about coincidences with a purpose. The book said you could create these coincidences by writing down questions you wanted answered. I had met a very beautiful girl at my hometown bar the night before and wanted to know more about her since my buddy at the bar told me she was poison. I wanted him to be wrong. So I wrote it down. Minutes later I left for the hospital, 50 miles from my hometown, to meet my family to sit out my sister's breast cancer surgery. There were about 30 of us in the waiting room and one lone woman in the corner. I struck up a conversation with the woman to try to include her. Turns out she was the girl's boss, owner of the bar, and had known her all her life and had babysat her as a child. Is there anything you want to ask me about her? She asks. I ask what she's like and she says she's not for you. You're too nice a guy. Just like that. 90 minutes after I wrote down the question, there was my answer. But it was not the answer I wanted, so I began dating her. So began a year-long heart-wrenching saga that I won't bore you with. I never opened that book again. It seemed too much like witchcraft.
Number 3.
I lived for several years as a child in a tiny town and we had a very distinctive house. The outside was all round stones which looked unusual for the area. Once I got locked in the bathroom and got a cut on my hand from the door, which left a scar. A neighbor told me a former resident's daughter also got stuck in that bathroom and couldn't get out. So fast forward to when I'm an adult, in another state, my friend's hitting on a girl and as they are talking, she mentions she used to live in the same small town. Turns out, the same house. So I asked her if she was ever locked in the bathroom as a child. She freaked, because it was her. Then I showed her my scar from when the same thing happened to me.
Number 4.
I was in Portland, Oregon about 2 years ago. It was about 2 years after I graduated from college and was visiting a close friend from school. It was my last night, and I was at a birthday party at a bar where I didn't know anyone except my friend. I got into a conversation with a guy who wasn't with the party and we realized we both went to the same college in Virginia. After a few more details we realized we lived in the same house, the Nightmare House. Eventually we realized he was the guy who lived in my room before I did, but 2 years earlier. It was pretty strange because I knew some of his roommates but not him before that night. Strange coincidence. One time I was in Berlin at a tiny hole in the wall called 8mm. Awesome bar, check it out if you're ever in East Berlin, screen movies on the walls and have awesome DJs. I'm there with this random Irish guy I met at the hostel and he's telling me we're about to get in a fight or something because some guy is just staring me down. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I looked at this guy and realized he lived across the street from one of my best friends in Richmond, Virginia. It was random. He had just moved to Berlin about 6 months earlier and had never been to that bar before.
Number 5.
Commenter. I moved to South America when I was 16. I once was looking around a bookstore, and in the tiny English language section I found a book about old houses in New York State. I opened it to a random page, and there was a picture of my house, The one I grew up in that my mom still lives in. Person B. I was looking around a gigantic used bookstore in my home city but on the far side from where I grew up. I found my way to the science fiction section and found a trilogy that I knew had been taught in a SF class in my high school. Inside the cover of the first volume I found the signature of a kid I'd gone to middle school and high school with. Person C. I was at a library book sale and saw a vintage set of the Practical Encyclopedia of Good Decorating and Home Improvement. Published in the 70s. I flipped through the pages to look at the hokey interior design and came across an aerial photo of a neighborhood. My neighborhood? 1,000 miles away. In a small town in upstate New York. Look. There was my backyard.
Number 6.
I lived in a sorority house in college where it was an ongoing joke throughout the sorority over many years that the house had a ghost friend. One of our sisters, appropriately nicknamed Crazy, would wake up in the mornings after drinking and tell us stories about how the ghost visited her in the night. She asked the ghost her name, she says, and she responded with what sounded like either Helen or Ellen. We would come home and find Crazy drunk and in the kitchen with her arm around the air talking to Helen Ellen some nights. Every odd thing that happened around the house was attributed to Helen Ellen. She was a common topic around the house. One day, a curious member of the sorority decided to go to the city's historical museum and find out what she could about our house. She came home with a package full of papers, pictures and information about every previous resident of the house. Lo and behold, we found out that the very first residents of the house, who built this most expensive house at the time in the city themselves, were named something or other in Ellen. Pictures were shown of where the two were married, under an archway in their extended living room, what was now my bedroom. Oh, how nice, right? The rest of the story was that Ellen had gone crazy somehow and was very sick. She died on the stairway in the house. This information included pictures of the funeral. Her casket sat in the exact spot they were married, the exact spot where I slept each night.
Number 7.
When I was 9, I was watching a Disney Channel movie about kids exploring a spooky museum at night to catch mummies or something. The tension in one scene started building, and the big scare finally came when one of the kids' watch alarms unexpectedly went off at 10 p.m. movie time. It just so happened that I had set my own watch alarm that morning for 10 p.m., and apparently the time of night in the scene coincided perfectly with real life so that both watches went off at the same time. I did the 9-year-old equivalent of shitting my pants, which was shitting my pants.
Number 8.
Freshman year, one of my friends threw a tiny gum wrapper, foil, airplane in lunch and it got stuck in the ceiling. 3 years later as a senior I was sitting at the same table with the same kid that threw it and the principal had come over and was yelling at us to keep it down, when out of nowhere the plane comes down and lands in her hair. This enraged her and wasn't going to let anyone leave until she found out who did it. We told her what happened and she gave us all detention for lying to her. I wasn't even mad I got detention, it was too funny.
Number 9.
A friend of a friend once was getting rid of a bunch of equipment racks. His company, Crane Eldick, formerly Eldick, needed the space. So I grabbed 3. Nobody knew what any of them were from. One of them had a marvelous set of switches and lights and a marvelous aerospace-grade wiring loom on massive multi-pin connectors. The front panel simply said Bombay Door Test Apparatus Rockwell B1B, Eldick was, of course, an aerospace manufacturer. Seeing as I run across aerospace chunkies all the time, no great shakes. Except my best buddy down in LA was making a space movie, and I knew the wiring harness would look great on an ersatz Soviet space station. So I shipped it to him. My buddy lived in a loft at the time. They shared the 4th floor of a building in the fashion district. Sarmak, the fine art photographer who lived next door, was over hanging out and having some red wine. He turned and looked at the table where the wiring harness was sitting. And turned white as a sheet. "What's wrong?" my buddy asked. "That's the wiring harness for a Rockwell B1B ALCM deployment bay test apparatus," he said. Yeah. I think it is. It was assembled for Eldick Corporation in 1981 in Mukilteo, Washington. Wow. Did you, photograph them or something? No. Before I decided to be a photographer, I was an aerospace engineer. At Eldick. In Mukilteo, Washington. It was the last project I worked on, actually. It's one of the things that made me go back to school. So. Did you, build a lot of those? No. We only needed the one. That one.
Number 10.
Right after freshman year I joined a research lab for the summer, As did this other guy who also finished the first year in biology. Sometime later my dad tells me that some woman he works with has a son, also in the same research institution as I am. I roll my eyes, yeah okay, my university has 60,000 plus people, what are the chances? I ask what lab? Turns out, the son is the guy I met in the lab. The place they work has nothing to do with our fields. Fast forward 3 years and the guy and I are dating, and decide to go to a country where my relatives live and have lived for a long time, to stay there for a bit. His family also has relatives in that city, it is on another continent, and they want to find out how far away my relatives are from theirs, location-wise. Turns out, mine and my boyfriend's uncles live on the same street, in the same building, one above the other, in identical apartments basically, have known each for like 15 years and are family friends.
Number 11.
My wife's uncle from Texas rarely gets to travel. Visiting us in the big city for the first time ever, he noticed a car parked on the street, directly in front of our apartment building. It was his daughter's car, still with her Texas license plates. She'd sold it 2 months earlier. Somehow this car, sold to a stranger, made its way to my neighborhood, to my street, and found street parking, impossible to find in my neighborhood, 10 feet in front of my front door on the day he visited.
Number 12.
A few years ago me and a friend decided to skip classes and take the train to Amsterdam, which is 1 hour from our hometown. In Amsterdam we took a walk down the red light district and saw our English teacher who was admiring some lady behind the window. When he saw us he froze and our eyes locked for a second. He started to nod and walked past us, still nodding and smiling, as if nothing had happened. Later I learned that he called in sick and didn't show up in school that day, he should have been teaching our class at that same moment. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time.